Most people believe attraction is created by chemistry alone. They assume it is driven entirely by passion, physical desire, and the excitement that brings two people together almost instantly. But when someone has avoidant attachment patterns, attraction often works in a very different way. Intensity by itself is rarely enough to hold their attention for long. Physical attraction may absolutely be present, but it does not automatically create emotional attachment. In many situations, it only touches the surface of what truly affects them. People with avoidant tendencies are usually not drawn in by emotional pursuit or overwhelming expressions of affection. Their nervous system is built around protecting emotional safety while preserving a strong sense of independence. Because of that, what reaches them most deeply is rarely loud or forceful. It is usually something much quieter. It is psychological. It is subtle. It moves past their defenses without creating feelings of pressure or emotional obligation. Once you understand that, your entire approach begins to change. You stop believing that constant effort, emotional chasing, or dramatic displays of devotion are the answer. Instead, you develop a presence that naturally encourages closeness without demanding it. One of the strongest qualities an avoidant person responds to is emotional stability within another person. Not emotional coldness, not emotional distance, but a calm confidence that shows your emotional well-being does not depend entirely on how they behave. People with avoidant attachment are often highly sensitive to emotional expectations. The moment they begin feeling responsible for another person's emotional state, their first instinct is frequently to create distance. But when they meet someone who can enjoy closeness without becoming emotionally dependent on it, something inside them begins to settle. They feel less threatened. Your calm presence quietly communicates an important message without needing to say a single word. It shows that you are capable of emotional closeness without losing your own identity. It shows that you are available without becoming emotionally overwhelming. Ironically, this is often the moment they begin moving toward you instead of away. Not because every fear suddenly disappears, but because the relationship no longer feels like something that will take away their freedom. Stay with me, because the next part explains why quiet emotional strength often creates a deeper impact than intense attraction ever can. Another quality that often reaches an avoidant person far more deeply than simple attraction is emotional depth combined with emotional balance. Many people mistakenly believe emotional restraint means someone is distant, uninterested, or emotionally unavailable. Yet avoidant individuals frequently experience it very differently. When emotions are expressed calmly, thoughtfully, and with quiet confidence, curiosity naturally begins to grow. They sense there is more beneath the surface that cannot be understood immediately. For someone with avoidant attachment, curiosity often becomes far more powerful than pure passion. Passion can be intense, but it often fades quickly. Curiosity continues long after the conversation has ended. It keeps their mind engaged. When someone reveals every feeling immediately, an avoidant person can become emotionally overwhelmed. The intensity may begin feeling predictable, heavy, or difficult to process. But when emotional depth exists alongside patience and self-control, it creates space for healthy curiosity instead of pressure. They begin wondering what else exists beneath your calm exterior. Rather than pulling away, they begin observing more closely. Observation matters because avoidant people often develop emotional connection internally long before they ever express it openly. There is another important quality that quietly influences them as well: emotional consistency without emotional pressure. Many people naturally respond to inconsistency by asking for reassurance, pushing for answers, or increasing emotional effort in hopes of creating closeness. But avoidant individuals are often extremely sensitive to pressure, even when it is subtle. The more emotionally pushed they feel, the stronger their instinct becomes to step back. On the other hand, when someone remains emotionally steady without forcing intimacy, their nervous system slowly begins lowering its defenses. Consistency creates predictability. Predictability creates safety. And for an avoidant person, safety is usually far more attractive than emotional intensity alone. This is why calm confidence often has a deeper effect than emotional pursuit. Someone who continues living their own life, following their own goals, and maintaining their own emotional center without constantly seeking reassurance, can become unexpectedly attractive to an avoidant person. It is not because they do not want love. More often, they fear losing themselves inside it. So when they meet someone who already feels emotionally complete, they experience far less fear that closeness will take away their independence. The relationship begins feeling less like an emotional trap and more like a genuine choice. There is also a quiet kind of mystery that naturally draws them in. This is not about playing games or pretending to be unavailable. It is simply the mystery that comes from someone who does not constantly explain every emotion, chase every conversation, or reveal every thought immediately. Avoidant people are often careful observers. They tend to watch behavior over time before allowing themselves to become emotionally vulnerable. When they encounter someone with emotional depth who does not overexpose themselves, their curiosity naturally becomes stronger. What they often fear is not love itself. They fear emotional engulfment. They fear obligation, dependency, and the possibility that closeness will eventually cost them their freedom, identity, or inner peace. That is why the people who leave the deepest impression are usually those who remain emotionally grounded, even while forming meaningful connections. They know how to love without holding on too tightly. They know how to care deeply without making another person responsible for their happiness. Ironically, that quiet emotional strength often becomes far more attractive than physical chemistry by itself. Physical desire may capture attention for a while, but emotional safety reaches much deeper. Once an avoidant person begins associating your presence with peace instead of pressure, something meaningful starts changing inside them. Their protective walls do not disappear overnight, but they gradually stop feeling as necessary as they once did. That is when attraction begins moving beyond physical interest and develops into emotional attachment, even if they struggle to explain it themselves. Curiosity continues long after initial attraction fades. When they cannot completely understand you right away, their mind naturally keeps returning to the connection. They reflect on conversations, remember small details, and quietly fill in the spaces left unexplained. Without realizing it, emotional investment begins growing beneath the surface. It happens gradually, almost silently, because genuine emotional attraction for an avoidant person is rarely built through intensity alone. More often, it grows through repeated experiences of safety, emotional balance, quiet confidence, and the realization that closeness does not have to come at the cost of who they are. This is often where emotional attachment quietly begins for an avoidant person. It does not usually grow from overwhelming passion or dramatic romance. More often, it develops through psychological curiosity that continues long after the first attraction has faded. Desire may create excitement in the beginning, but curiosity keeps their emotional attention alive over time. Another powerful influence is consistency without emotional pressure. Many avoidant individuals have learned to expect instability whenever relationships become emotionally deeper. They anticipate shifting moods, emotional reactions, guilt, demands, or conflict as intimacy grows stronger. So when they meet someone who remains emotionally steady instead, calm in conversation, predictable in behavior, and emotionally grounded, it introduces something completely different to their nervous system. For many of them, emotional closeness has always been connected to unpredictability. But steady behavior slowly changes that expectation. It teaches them that connection does not automatically lead to emotional chaos. Intensity may create temporary attraction, but emotional calm creates regulation. That feeling of safety can become deeply meaningful for someone who has spent years preparing themselves for emotional disruption. There is another form of closeness that often reaches them even more deeply. It is the experience of feeling understood without feeling emotionally cornered. One of their greatest fears is losing control through emotional exposure. Being fully seen can feel overwhelming when it comes with pressure, constant questions, or expectations they are not ready to meet. But when someone quietly notices their habits, understands their silence, and recognizes emotional changes without demanding immediate explanations, something important begins happening inside them. It creates closeness without intrusion. Most people try to build intimacy by pushing for greater emotional access. Avoidant people often connect much more deeply through acceptance than through pursuit. When your actions quietly communicate, "I see you, but I do not need to force you to open up," it often feels far safer than emotional intensity ever could. Stay with me, because this next idea explains why giving healthy space can sometimes create more connection than constantly trying to stay close. Respecting emotional space has tremendous psychological value when relating to an avoidant person. Many people naturally interpret distance as rejection and immediately move closer in an attempt to repair the relationship. But avoidant individuals often experience space in a completely different way. For them, distance frequently becomes a method of emotional regulation. It allows them to regain their balance when emotions begin feeling too overwhelming. Because of that, when someone allows healthy space without reacting with anger, guilt, passive aggression, or emotional punishment, it interrupts the pattern they have come to expect. Many avoidant people are used to seeing distance create conflict. They expect withdrawal to be followed by accusations, emotional pressure, or escalating arguments. But when space is met with emotional maturity instead, they often experience relief. That sense of relief can become surprisingly attractive because it challenges their long-held belief that closeness always creates pressure. Emotional self-confidence has a similar effect. Avoidant individuals are highly aware of emotional dependence, even when it appears in very subtle ways. When someone constantly seeks reassurance, validation, or emotional stability from them, they often experience it as pressure. Their natural response is usually to create distance, but quiet confidence sends an entirely different message. When you carry yourself with emotional stability and your sense of worth does not depend on their approval, you communicate independence. You demonstrate that you are capable of standing on your own while still choosing connection. That difference matters tremendously because what often frightens them is not intimacy itself. It is the fear of becoming responsible for another person's emotional well-being. When they encounter someone who already feels emotionally secure, attraction begins developing on a much deeper level than physical chemistry alone can create. Instead of feeling trapped by expectations, they begin experiencing the relationship as something freely chosen. Another quality that strongly influences avoidant people is emotional steadiness during conflict. They are often highly sensitive to emotional escalation. Raised voices, impulsive reactions, overwhelming emotions, or dramatic confrontations tend to activate their instinct to shut down or leave the situation. Intense conflict usually pushes them farther away rather than bringing them closer. Calm communication creates an entirely different experience. Expressing your needs clearly, honestly, and respectfully, without emotional volatility, allows them to remain engaged instead of retreating inward. Over time, emotional presence becomes far more valuable than emotional intensity. Lasting intimacy is rarely built through dramatic emotional moments. It grows through repeated experiences of safety, emotional regulation, and dependable connection. Another quality many avoidant people quietly admire is a meaningful life outside the relationship. They often struggle when a relationship becomes another person's entire identity. If someone gives up their goals, interests, friendships, or personal direction for the relationship, the emotional weight of that dependence can begin feeling overwhelming. But someone who continues building a fulfilling life naturally communicates autonomy. Purpose becomes attractive because it shows that the relationship adds to your life rather than becoming your entire world. There is no silent expectation that they must carry your happiness or become your only source of emotional fulfillment. Ironically, that freedom often creates more room for genuine attachment to develop naturally. Emotional honesty without hidden expectations also has a powerful effect. Many avoidant people have learned to believe that vulnerability always comes with emotional obligations. They expect open conversations to be followed by demands for reassurance, rescue, or constant emotional caregiving. But when someone shares their feelings simply because they are being truthful, without expecting immediate validation or emotional repayment, the experience feels completely different. It becomes honesty without emotional pressure. That kind of openness quietly challenges everything they have learned to fear about closeness. They slowly begin realizing that intimacy does not always require losing themselves, sacrificing their independence, or carrying another person's emotional world alone. Physical attraction by itself rarely changes those deeper beliefs. It may capture attention for a while, but it does not usually transform long-standing emotional patterns. What truly changes those patterns is repeatedly experiencing connection that feels emotionally safe, closeness without control, vulnerability without chaos, and love without emotional captivity. When those experiences continue over time, emotional attachment begins forming in places that attraction alone could never reach. Finally, clear boundaries expressed with calm confidence often influence an avoidant person far more than emotional persuasion ever will. Many people try to maintain connection by increasing emotional intensity, offering endless reassurance, or constantly trying to prove their value. But avoidant individuals often respond much more positively to someone who communicates healthy limits respectfully and maintains them without anger, threats, or emotional punishment. Calm boundaries demonstrate self-respect, emotional maturity, and inner stability. They show that you value both yourself and the relationship without needing control over either one. For an avoidant person, that combination often feels far safer than emotional intensity ever could, because it replaces pressure with trust, uncertainty with predictability, and fear with the possibility of genuine emotional security. It removes the hidden struggle for control that many avoidant people instinctively resist. You are not trying to manage their choices, and at the same time you are not sacrificing your own needs simply to keep the relationship alive. That balance is far more important than most people realize. People with avoidant attachment are often highly sensitive to situations where guilt, emotional pressure, or control begin replacing genuine connection. But when someone remains steady within their own healthy boundaries, without creating emotional chaos, it becomes surprisingly attractive. Calm self-respect carries a quiet strength that feels much safer than emotional desperation ever could. Another quality that affects avoidant individuals deeply is comfortable silence, not emotional coldness, not withdrawing from the relationship, but silence that feels natural, peaceful, and unforced. The ability to simply exist together without constantly filling every moment with reassurance, conversation, explanations, or emotional maintenance creates a kind of peace that many avoidant people rarely experience. Most people assume connection always has to be expressive and emotionally intense to feel meaningful. Yet avoidant individuals often experience closeness through emotional spaciousness rather than emotional intensity. Constant stimulation keeps the mind active, but peaceful silence allows the nervous system to settle. For someone who has spent years expecting emotional overwhelm, peace becomes incredibly powerful. When another person can simply share space without demanding emotional performance, it quietly communicates safety. There is no pressure to react perfectly, no expectation to constantly manage another person's emotional world, only calm presence. And it is often that calm presence that slowly allows curiosity, trust, and emotional attachment to grow. Stay with me, because the next shift is often the one that changes the entire dynamic. Perhaps the most meaningful psychological shift happens the moment you stop feeling the need to influence them at all. The moment you stop trying to secure their affection, force emotional clarity, or convince them to choose you, the relationship begins changing in a completely different way. Avoidant individuals are often naturally drawn toward emotional independence. They tend to admire people who feel emotionally grounded within themselves, rather than emotionally dependent on outside validation. When your energy no longer communicates, "Please choose me," but instead quietly says, "I value this connection, but I remain complete with or without it," their defenses often begin lowering on their own. Suddenly, the relationship no longer feels like an obligation. It begins feeling voluntary, safe, and free. Freedom is one of the deepest emotional needs for someone with avoidant attachment. That is why quiet presence often reaches them much more deeply than emotional intensity ever can. Passion by itself cannot create lasting psychological safety. Physical attraction may capture attention for a while, but it does not automatically build trust within the nervous system. Avoidant people are fully capable of experiencing attraction, What they often resist is emotional pressure disguised as love. When attraction becomes connected to expectations, emotional demands, constant reassurance, or fear of disappointing another person, their instinct is usually to step back. But calm, emotionally balanced presence moves past those defenses almost effortlessly because it does not threaten their sense of autonomy. Once they begin connecting your presence with freedom instead of emotional captivity, attachment often starts forming in a much deeper and more lasting way. The feelings that remain with them are not always dramatic excitement or overwhelming passion. More often, they remember relief. Relief that they can simply breathe around you. Relief that closeness no longer feels emotionally consuming. Relief that they are not constantly being pushed into emotional situations before they are ready. Alongside that relief comes curiosity, quiet fascination, and a gentle emotional pull they often struggle to explain, even to themselves. This is why the strongest relationships with avoidant individuals are rarely built through traditional ideas of attraction alone. They are built through emotional atmosphere. They are built through the feeling your presence creates inside another person's nervous system. Many people misunderstand avoidant behavior because they focus only on what they see externally. They notice the periods of distance, the inconsistency, and the emotional withdrawal. But beneath those behaviors, the avoidant mind is constantly scanning for emotional danger. It is quietly asking whether closeness will cost them their peace, their independence, or their emotional stability. That is why they respond much more strongly to emotional experiences than to emotional words. They usually do not connect through what someone wants from them. They connect through how someone makes them feel inside themselves. When your presence consistently feels calm, respectful, emotionally grounded, and free from hidden expectations, something rare begins happening. Their nervous system slowly stops preparing for emotional danger. That is where genuine attachment often begins. Not through emotional intensity, not through chasing, not through dramatic effort, but through steady presence, emotional safety, quiet consistency, and the absence of pressure, control, chaos, or emotional volatility. While passion may create powerful moments, peace is what creates emotional permanence. That is why some people remain unforgettable long after physical attraction fades. That is why certain relationships leave a lasting impression without anyone forcing themselves into another person's life. Quiet psychological safety often reaches much deeper than emotional intensity ever can. In the end, the relationships that truly last are not always the loudest or the most dramatic. They are often the calmest. They are built on freedom, mutual respect, emotional steadiness, healthy boundaries, and the ability for both people to remain fully themselves while allowing closeness to develop naturally. That is the kind of presence an avoidant person rarely forgets. Ultimately, avoidant individuals are not truly running away from love itself. More often, they are running from pressure, emotional overwhelm, and the fear of losing themselves within the relationship. That is why intensity alone rarely creates lasting emotional change. What stays with them is not relentless pursuit, constant reassurance, or emotional force. It is the experience of safety. A calm, emotionally grounded, self-sufficient presence creates something far more powerful than temporary attraction. When someone respects healthy space, communicates with emotional maturity, maintains clear boundaries, and offers closeness without trying to control it, the avoidant nervous system gradually begins to relax. Once safety replaces pressure, genuine attachment has room to grow naturally. The deepest relationships are not created through chasing. They are built through quiet confidence, emotional steadiness, maturity, and the ability to love deeply without trying to possess another person. In the end, what lingers most strongly in the mind of an avoidant person is rarely intensity. It is relief, peace, curiosity, and the rare realization that emotional closeness can exist without emotional danger. That quiet sense of psychological safety is what continues long after temporary desire has disappeared.